Have you ever imagined a company so heavily criticized that it seemed destined to fail? A brand that was constantly mocked, a brand that made headlines for all the wrong reasons, a company surrounded by complaints, controversies, and bad press almost every single month. Today that might sound hard to believe, but some of the most powerful companies in the world once stood in exactly that position. Before they became global symbols of success, they were seen as examples of what not to do. Consumers complained. Experts predicted disaster. Journalists questioned every move they made, and the internet seemed to find a new reason to criticize them every single day. For many people, it felt like only a matter of time before they disappeared. The logic seemed obvious. If so many people hated the brand, how could it possibly survive? If customers were constantly unhappy, how could it continue growing? And if criticism never stopped, how could it ever build a strong reputation? Everything pointed toward failure. But what nobody realized was that something very different was happening behind the scenes. While critics focused on the company's flaws, the brand was quietly accumulating something far more valuable than approval. It was accumulating attention. And in the modern world, attention is one of the most valuable currencies that exists, because there's a massive difference between being hated and being ignored. An ignored brand disappears. Nobody talks about it. Nobody comments on it. Nobody shares it. Eventually, it simply stops existing in people's minds. But a hated brand, that brand stays in the conversation. People argue about it, criticize it, complain about it, share articles, create memes, make videos, post opinions. And without realizing it, they keep the company permanently embedded in the culture. That's exactly what happened. Every controversy generated more headlines, every criticism sparked new debates, every mistake attracted even more attention, and the more people talked about the brand, the more famous it became. The most fascinating part? Many of its biggest critics genuinely believed they were hurting the company, but in reality, they were often doing the exact opposite. They were promoting the brand's name to millions of people, because most companies face a massive problem. Nobody pays attention to them. They spend millions of dollars on advertising just to earn a few seconds of public interest. But this brand seemed to receive attention for free, every single day, non-stop, and that started creating an unexpected effect. Some people became curious, others decided to try the products just to understand what all the controversy was about. And some actually started liking the brand precisely because it challenged mainstream opinion. Slowly, rejection began transforming into relevance, and relevance is the first step towards something much bigger, because before a brand becomes desirable, it first has to become impossible to ignore. At the time, almost nobody could see it. It looked like just another company surrounded by problems, just another brand struggling to survive in a competitive market. But looking back now, it's obvious that something important was happening. The company wasn't disappearing because of the criticism, it was growing because of it. And without almost anyone noticing, the brand that everyone loved to hate was beginning the transformation that would eventually turn it into one of the greatest global obsessions in business history. There's an unwritten rule that quietly dominates the modern world, a rule that many companies spend years trying to understand, and some never understand at all. The rule is simple. It doesn't matter what people are saying about you. What matters is that they're talking. While traditional brands were spending fortunes on advertising campaigns, market research, and carefully crafted strategies designed to earn public approval, this company seemed to be playing an entirely different game. It wasn't just dominating the market, it was dominating the conversation. Every new product launch sparked debates, every decision triggered reactions, every mistake became a headline, and every controversy put the company's name back in front of millions of people. At first, it looked like a complete disaster. Analysts pointed out the problems. Journalists highlighted the criticism. Customers complained across social media. Everything suggested the brand's reputation was falling apart. But behind all that negativity, something incredibly valuable was happening. Attention. And in the 21st century, attention has become one of the rarest commodities on Earth because we live in a world where millions of pieces of information compete for space inside our minds every single day. notifications, videos, news, advertisements, social media, everything fighting for the same few seconds of human attention. In that environment, being noticed is a victory. Being impossible to ignore is a superpower. And that's exactly what this brand achieved. Even people who hated its products knew its name. Even people who criticized its decisions followed its news. Even people who swore they would never buy anything from the company kept talking about it, and without realizing it, they were strengthening its cultural presence. There's a fascinating psychological reason behind this. The human brain pays attention to emotion: anger, shock, outrage, surprise, curiosity. The stronger the emotional reaction, the harder it becomes to ignore. And this brand seemed to understand that better than its competitors. While other companies were trying to look perfect, it was creating reactions. While others chased approval, it generated discussion. And the more discussion it created, the more relevant it became. Then something interesting started to happen. People who had never heard of the brand suddenly knew exactly who it was. People who normally wouldn't have paid attention became curious. Consumers who initially showed up just to criticize decided to try the products for themselves, and some of them became customers. The company had discovered an uncomfortable truth about human behavior. Being loved helps, but being talked about helps a lot more. Because a brand can survive without love, but it rarely survives without attention. Slowly, what looked like an endless series of crises started revealing a hidden opportunity. Every criticism expanded its reach. Every controversy increased its exposure. Every debate strengthened its presence inside people's minds, and that's when the company realized something that would change its future forever. Approval is valuable, but relevance is essential, because people can ignore things they like. But they rarely ignore things that make them feel something, and while the rest of the industry was still trying to figure out what was happening, this brand was turning rejection into visibility, visibility into curiosity, and curiosity into growth. What looked like a reputation crisis was quietly becoming one of the most powerful growth strategies of the modern era, because at the end of the day, the worst thing that can happen to a brand isn't being hated, it's being forgotten. There's something fascinating about the human mind, something that explains not only the success of this brand, but also the success of some of the biggest cultural phenomena in history. Anything that divides opinion instantly becomes more interesting. When everyone agrees on something, the conversation dies quickly. But when something sparks debate, people pay attention. They want to understand it. They want to join the conversation. And that's exactly what happened with this brand. It stopped being just a company. It became a topic, a debate, a cultural battleground. On one side were the critics, people who believed the products were overpriced, people who questioned the company's strategy, people who simply couldn't understand why anyone would buy into it. On the other side were the supporters, passionate customers, dedicated fans, people who believed the critics simply didn't get it, and between those two groups something incredibly valuable was happening. Conversation, lots of conversation, on social media, in YouTube videos, on forums, in news articles, on television, in everyday discussions between friends. Suddenly everyone had an opinion, and when everyone has an opinion about something, that thing becomes culturally relevant. The brand recognized this before most people did. While other companies saw controversy as a threat, this one started seeing it as fuel. Because there's a powerful truth about human attention. Strong emotions create memory. People quickly forget things that feel ordinary, but they rarely forget things that provoke a reaction. Anger, admiration, curiosity, shock. Any intense emotion leaves a mark. And this company seemed to understand that dynamic perfectly. Every controversial decision generated more discussion. Every unexpected launch created new headlines. Every bold move increased its cultural presence. What's even more fascinating is that many of the attacks helped the brand more than any advertising campaign ever could. Because criticism creates shares. Shares create reach. Reach creates curiosity. And curiosity creates new customers. It becomes a self-sustaining cycle. Maybe that's why so many people first discovered the brand through criticism. They heard someone complaining. They looked it up to see what the controversy was about. They discovered the products, and some of them ended up liking what they saw. Without realizing it, the critics themselves were helping expand the company's audience. But there's an even deeper psychological explanation behind all of this. The human brain is naturally drawn to conflict. For thousands of years, we've paid attention to disagreements, tensions, and social battles, because conflict carries information, and information can mean advantage. That's why controversial stories attract more attention than ordinary ones. That's why debates are more engaging than consensus. And that's why controversial brands often become far more visible than neutral ones. This company understood that brilliantly. It realized it didn't need everyone to love it. It simply needed to be impossible to ignore. And the more divided opinions became, the stronger the brand grew. Because every argument increased its relevance, every controversy expanded its reach, every criticism reinforced its place in the culture. The company had discovered something very few businesses are willing to accept. Indifference is far more dangerous than rejection. When nobody talks about you, you disappear. But when people debate you every day, you continue occupying space in their minds. And in the modern world, occupying space in people's minds is one of the most valuable forms of power. That's how this company transformed controversy into strategy, criticism into publicity, debate into growth, and conflict into relevance. The more the brand divided opinions, the harder it became to ignore, and the harder it became to ignore, the bigger it grew. There's a very rare moment in the life of a company, a moment when it stops competing on price, stops competing on quality, stops competing on features, and starts competing for something far more powerful: identity. That's exactly what happened to this brand. In the beginning, people bought its products the same way they bought anything else. They compared prices, analyzed features, looked at alternatives. It was a relatively rational decision, but little by little, something started to change. The brand began to represent much more than what it actually sold. It started representing an idea, an attitude, a way of seeing the world. And once that happened, the products stopped being just products. They became symbols. What's even more fascinating is that many people started buying the brand precisely because it was criticized. That sounds contradictory. But there's a powerful psychological explanation behind it. When something is universally accepted, it loses part of its ability to distinguish the people who use it. But when something divides opinion, it gains meaning. It becomes a statement, a conscious choice, a way of expressing identity. For some customers, wearing that brand was a silent way of saying, "I don't need everyone's approval. I think for myself. I like what I like." And the more criticism the brand received, the stronger that message became. Because every attack reinforced the feeling that its customers were part of something different, something not everyone understood. And that's where one of the most powerful transformations in modern marketing takes place. The company stops selling products and starts selling belonging, because human beings have a deep need to be part of something. For most of human history, belonging meant survival, protection, security, acceptance. And even though the world has changed, that mechanism is still deeply embedded in the human brain. We still seek groups, tribes, communities, people who share our values and worldview. This brand understood that before many of its competitors did. It realized it could offer something much bigger than a product. It could offer collective identity. And that's exactly what happened. Customers began recognizing each other. They shared the same symbols, the same references, the same perspective. Slowly, a sense of community started to emerge. And when a brand creates community, something extraordinary happens. Customers stop acting like customers. They start acting like followers. And there's a huge difference. A customer buys, a follower believes. A customer can switch brands tomorrow. A follower stays loyal even when criticism appears. A customer consumes. A follower promotes, defends, shares, persuades others. And that transformation changed everything, because the company had acquired something that money alone can't easily buy: emotional loyalty. People were no longer connected to the product itself. They were connected to what it represented. the feeling of being part of something special, the idea of belonging to a group that saw value where others saw controversy, and that created an incredibly powerful force. The more the brand was attacked, the more united its followers became. The more criticism it faced, the stronger the community surrounding it seemed to grow. The company was no longer just a product manufacturer. It had become a cultural movement, a modern tribe, a shared identity. And when a brand reaches that level of emotional connection, it stops competing only against other companies. It starts occupying space in people's minds and in their sense of self. Very few competitive advantages are harder to copy than that. That's when the brand realized something that would change its future forever. Customers buy products, but followers build empires. And by that point, it had millions of them. Up to this point, the brand was already well known. People were talking about it. Critics were still attacking it. Consumers were arguing about it across social media, and the company had already achieved something incredibly valuable: attention. But there was still one major question hanging in the air. Was all this popularity actually sustainable, or was it just another strange trend destined to fade away? Then came the moment that changed everything, the moment the world's most influential people entered the game. Artists, athletes, musicians, celebrities, influencers. And when that happens, public perception can change almost overnight, because trends rarely spread through products alone, they spread through influence. All it took was a handful of famous faces wearing the brand for something remarkable to happen. What once looked strange suddenly looked bold. What once seemed excessive now felt innovative. And what used to be the punchline of a joke started looking desirable. The brand hadn't changed. The products were still essentially the same, but people's perception had changed completely. And perception is one of the most powerful forces in business, because human beings are constantly watching the people they admire. When we see someone successful wearing a certain brand, our brains make automatic connections. If that person has status, maybe the brand does too. If that person has influence, maybe there's something special about that product. It's an ancient psychological mechanism. We learn by observing others. We imitate behavior. We copy symbols. We follow social cues. And this brand began benefiting from that process on a global scale. Musicians wore the products on stage. Athletes showed them off at major events. Influencers posted photos to millions of followers, and every appearance made the brand even more culturally relevant. But there was another force making everything move even faster. Social media. In the past, a trend could take years to spread around the world. Now all it took was one viral photo, one post, one video, and suddenly millions of people knew exactly what that product was. The speed was unbelievable. A celebrity posted a picture wearing the brand. Hours later, thousands of comments appeared. Days later, the product was sold out. Weeks later, millions wanted to be part of the trend, and the more people wanted the brand, the more desirable it became. This is what psychologists call social proof. When we see large numbers of people valuing something, we instinctively assume it must have value. And when those people are famous, admired, and influential, that effect becomes even stronger. The brand understood this perfectly. It realized it didn't need to convince the entire market. It only needed to win over the right people. And once those people embraced the brand, everything else would happen almost automatically. That's exactly what happened. The photos went viral. New releases sold out instantly. Waiting lists grew longer and longer. And the harder it became to get the products, the more valuable they seemed. Scarcity fueled desire, desire fueled conversation, and conversation fueled fame. It was a perfect cycle. What's most impressive is that the criticism never disappeared. People still attacked the brand. Many consumers still hated it. Experts continued questioning its success. But now it didn't matter nearly as much, because the company had achieved something far more powerful. It had become a cultural symbol. And when a company becomes a cultural symbol, it no longer depends solely on market approval. It becomes part of the culture itself, part of people's identities, part of everyday conversations, part of what people aspire to own. The entire world started looking at the brand differently. What once looked like failure now looked like innovation. What once seemed ridiculous now looked like the future, and what was once a joke had become a status symbol. That was the moment the transformation became impossible to ignore. The brand was no longer just a controversial company. It had become a global phenomenon, and for the first time, even its biggest critics started realizing that something extraordinary was happening. The brand that was supposed to disappear had become an obsession, and its influence was only just beginning. Today, looking back, it's almost impossible to believe this company was once considered a failure. When you see billions in revenue, millions of loyal customers' products, selling out within minutes, and a level of cultural influence that stretches across countries, generations, and industries, everything seems to make sense. It feels inevitable, as if success was always destined to happen, but the reality was very different. For years, the brand faced relentless criticism. It was mocked, dismissed, questioned. Many people genuinely believed it would never survive. Experts claimed its strategies were far too risky. Consumers argued its products were overrated. Competitors watched from a distance with skepticism, and for a long time, it looked like the critics were right. But there's something fascinating about every major transformation. They rarely look brilliant while they're happening. Most of the time, they look like mistakes. They look excessive, they look irrational, because anything that challenges established norms creates discomfort, and human beings naturally resist what feels different. Maybe that's why so many revolutions begin as jokes. It happened with technologies that changed the world. It happened with artists who redefined entire generations. And it happened with companies that transformed entire industries. First, people laugh, then they criticize, then they watch, and eventually they copy. That brand followed the exact same path. While people tried to make it disappear, it kept growing. While people tried to ignore it, it dominated the conversation. While people focused on its flaws, it was quietly building relevance, and eventually, the company discovered a truth that would change its future forever. In the modern world, being perfect isn't enough. You can have quality, you can have tradition, you can have an outstanding product, but if nobody is paying attention, none of it matters. Because attention is the starting point of influence, and influence is the starting point of every empire. The brand realized that being impossible to ignore was far more powerful than trying to please everyone, because pleasing everyone is nearly impossible. Creating emotion, that's different. People quickly forget what feels ordinary. They forget what feels neutral. They forget what creates no reaction at all, but they never forget what makes them feel something. Admiration, curiosity, shock, desire, even rejection. Because emotion creates memory, and memory creates relevance. That's exactly what happened. The company turned criticism into publicity, turned controversy into attention, turned attention into influence, and turned influence into billions. But perhaps the biggest lesson from this story goes far beyond business, because it reveals something profound about human nature. People don't follow the best products. They follow the most compelling stories. They don't connect only with companies. They connect with symbols, with ideas, with emotions, and few stories are more powerful than the story of something that was underestimated and won. Maybe that's why this journey continues to fascinate people today, because it challenges a belief that almost all of us carry, the belief that approval creates success, when in reality, success is often created by the courage to keep going without approval, the courage to be different, to make people uncomfortable, to challenge expectations, to stay loyal to a vision when nobody else believes in it. The most hated brand in the market discovered exactly that. It realized controversy wasn't its weakness, it was its advantage, and instead of running from criticism, it learned how to turn criticism into fuel. In the end, what looked like a problem became its greatest asset. And the company that many people once considered a joke became a global obsession, a brand capable of influencing millions of people around the world, a brand that proved something history teaches over and over again. Never underestimate something just because it looks strange in the beginning, because some of the biggest revolutions in history started exactly that way. with someone looking at an idea and saying, "That will never work," and yet it did, and on a massive scale. Now I want to hear from you. Can you think of a brand, company, or trend that people are mocking today, but that could become the next global phenomenon tomorrow? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like the video, subscribe to Profit and Peril, and turn on notifications, because here, the most unlikely business stories often reveal the biggest secrets about money, power, and human behavior.